Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind those of you who are working on backlogs, just check in the www.chartingcoach.ca/backlog-buddies is a place you can come and do your backlog alongside fellow clinicians and physicians. So if you want to kind of hang out and have some ability to stay on task for the 2-hour sessions, come along. We'd love to see you there. Hello and welcome, everybody. Today we have special guest, Dr. Dike Drummond, who is here, and he works a lot in the space of burnout and sustainability of practice. And I've asked him if he would introduce himself and kind of tell us about why he ended up in this space helping us. So I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be on the show. And I'm happy to tell my story because when I work with people who go into their organization and want to become the wellness champion of the organization, the key is if you're going to start a wellness movement, the first thing you have to do is tell your story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let me tell my story. In my family, and everybody's story is a little bit different. In my family, my grandmother, my mother's mother, went off to college in the 30s, wanting to be a doctor, but came back a teacher, honorable profession. My mom went to college in the 1950s, wanting to be a doctor, came back as a teacher. Both of them have schools named after them. They were elementary school teachers. My mom was a gifted and talented teacher. But when I was born as the firstborn grandchild and a boy, it was dreamed into me that I would be the doctor. And the origin story is actually my mother's father, who was a GP back in the Depression. She told stories about hot pies on the front porch and a chicken tied to the back doorknob, that kind of stuff. So it's a very romantic vision. But my family is not one of those families where it was always, you're going to be a doctor. It was never said out loud. And when I was a senior in college and I had basically a 4.0 in honors biology, I didn't want to be a graduate student. I didn't want to be a lab rat. And I thought to myself, I thought it was a brilliant insight, right? Wow, this is a perfect pre-med degree. But of course, my mother and grandmother have been plotting for this for years. At least that's what my father told me just before he died. And I applied to a bunch of medical schools and I got in at Mayo. And they let me know there was only 7 out-of-state slots and I got one of them. The funny thing is, you get one faculty interview at Mayo, and my interview was with a guy who played rugby just like me. So all we did was talk rugby for a half an hour, and I still, good old boy network, what are you going to do? I know, unearned white privilege, the whole thing, right? Sorry, I apologize. And I went to medical school, and there was only one thing I wanted to be, and that was just like Dr. Schmidt, my GP when I was growing up. I just wanted to be a simple country family doctor. And so I went to Mayo for 4 years, University of California, Davis in the Reading program. I ended up delivering 500 babies and being a full service family doc for 10 years in Mount Vernon, Washington, which is halfway between Seattle and Vancouver, BC, on the West Coast on Interstate 5. I loved being a family doc. Back in the days of paper charts, we'd see 30 a day easy. I thought being a doctor was just like being a detective, followed by a teacher in rapid order, multiple times a day, right? Figure it out and teach the person how to take care of themselves to get better. I thought that was just beautiful. And then I was always a member of the leadership team in the group. I was chairperson of the executive committee the second year I was there. And one day when I was 30, back in 2000, I started having these feelings in my practice like somebody had their hands around my neck and they were choking me. And it happened for a couple of weeks. It was very scary. I couldn't understand it. I was eligible for a sabbatical because I'd been with the group for 10 years. And so I took 30 days off, shaved my head, did a bunch of yoga, didn't do any medicine, prayed that it would go away when I came back. But the first day back, it returned. I didn't have a lot of coping skills at the time. So what I did was at lunchtime that day back, I walked into the CEO's office, signed my resignation, and walked away from my career, which I don't recommend as a transition strategy. So, dear listeners, if you feel like that, or any of your colleagues comes up to you and tells you they're going to chuck it all and walk away, don't let them. Don't quit. It just burns way too many bridges. Now, I got really lucky. I could work locum tenens for my old employer and support the family reasonably easily. The first thing I did was I went and got certified as a coach. ICF, International Coach Federation, coach. And coaching and being a doctor are very, very different skill sets. The experience of being a coach is very different than being a doctor. Doctor holds the client as diseased, and I'm going to have the answers, and I'm going to give orders, and people are going to follow them. That's not how a coach works. Coach asks questions and holds the client as capable. Client has the answers. We just need to ask the better question. And so what happened was I had about 10 years of wandering in the wilderness and building my now ex-wife. My ex-wife had a leadership facilitation training company. So we taught people how to run better meetings, and I was the CO everything while she was the stage talent. That marriage and that business went away 10 years later in 2010. And I was burnt to the ground for the second time. I can still remember laying in the fetal position on the floor of my bachelor pad, covered in my own snot. I needed a coaching client, or I'd have to move back to Michigan into my dad's basement. It completely burnt to the ground, and started thehappymd.com on the internet. It was the first physician burnout coach on the internet. And that's where I started reaching back into the community of helpers and healers and doctors and doing what I could to help people avoid what happened to me, where I was spit right out of the system because I didn't have any resources. And what's happened is, and we'll talk about all the different things that have happened since then, but what's happened is the path that I have walked has made it so that I'm the person I would have loved to talk to in 2000. It's
Perfect. Yes.
cosmically tragic, right?
Yeah.
And so as the first person on the internet, physician coach on the internet, I was very fortunate because I knew how to market on the internet. And check this out, Sarah, you're not going to believe it, okay? In 2010, you had to go to the public library and do a Google search in the public library to get a clean computer so you could see what the results were, because there was no such thing as an incognito window, okay? So I went to the public library and I searched physician burnout. I just punched in physician burnout and I looked at all the things on the first page. And back then it was 10 simple results on the first page. None of them had been constructed to be there. They were all just research articles where in the title of the research article, it said physician and burnout in that order. And I knew how to make a page that ranks. So in about 6 months, I had 8 of the first 10 positions on that search page. And my website dominated search for that term until Google switched its algorithms up in about 2016. But that's what powered my practice. And after I'd coached about 40 doctors, I saw patterns in what was burning them out and what was getting them better. Those turned into blog posts. Those turned into a book. Because of my visibility on Google, CMOs and CEOs were calling me and saying, can you train my doctors so they don't whine so much and maybe don't burn out so much? Turned it into a line of trainings. And at this point, I've trained 40,000 doctors on 4 continents for over 200 different organizations. And the only thing that ever slowed me down was COVID.
Yeah. We'd like to say it slowed everybody down, but that's not true.
Well, if you were somebody who made a living in live presentations, it destroyed your entire presentation calendar. And I remember the day, March 9th, 2020. And people that I talked to who worked from the stage have the same week in their mind. And so for instance, next week, I'm going to the American Academy of Family Practice annual Physician Wellbeing Conference. It's the 7th year in a row. I've got 2 presentations there. And then the week after that, I'm going to be working for the Oklahoma Primary Care Association, which is an association of all the FQHCs in the state. And we're going to be training hundreds of doctors there in 4 consecutive days of live training. And in between, I just closed a coaching client just before I got on the phone with you. So things are busy. Things are busy.
Yeah.
And not in a good way.
Maybe we need to put more people around you.
No, it's not. No, what I mean is that my business is built on helping people who are in distress.
Yeah.
And the distress
There's too, yes.
is physician burnout.
Yes.
And the need is enormous. 63% in the last survey of doctors are suffering from at least one symptom of burnout. And yet the number of people who actually ask for help and utilize services is just exceedingly small. So that's what I mean by we're busy, but it's because of an
not good
ongoing train wreck.
Yeah. Yes, got it. I have a question about that initial burnout that you experienced. Had you had anyone notice things were different about you within that clinical day before this 30 days off? Like, did you, like, you were noticing physical manifestations for yourself, but did anyone notice anything else? Was anyone in there saying, hey, what's going on?
That wasn't the culture. I wasn't necessarily approachable.
Okay.
Because I'm very alpha, right? And
Yeah.
I'm a big old white guy, captain of the local rugby team, all that good stuff. And it needs to be said that my mother and my grandmother had passed away at that point.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
for me as a family doc, I always felt like one of the most enjoyable parts of my practice was when I saw something I couldn't figure out.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is fascinating. I've never seen that before, which would drive a specialist absolutely bananas. But for me,
Yeah.
and I counted it up because I was a pretty busy doc. In 10 years, I did 35,000 patient visits. And so the frequency with which I saw something I'd never seen before was very few and far between. And my mother and my grandmother were dead. So for me, it just came to an end. And as I look back from now, I'm 66 right now. It was a 10-year period. And I can actually slice my life into transitions every 10 years. And that was the doctor period, right?
Yeah.
The clinician, the one-on-one clinician period.
And was there anything in retrospect that was happening within the clinical day or within that environment that you think contributed to this burnout, that drove you into this place where you weren't physically capable of continuing?
No, it was spiritual.
Okay.
It was my time was at an end. And I just want to be clear, back then it was paper charts straight up.
Yeah.
I saw 30 a day easy
Yeah.
because my charting didn't slow me down, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the tragedy that has led to the epidemic now is clear to me because I functioned before it happened. One, EMR doubled the workload in the back office, but nobody put any more hands on deck. Doubled the workload, no more hands on deck, and every doctor had to retroactively become a data entry clerk because it was so poorly designed. The user interface was so poorly designed. And we're starting to come out of that. There's some really important AI developments just in the last 18 months. And the second is the switch to employee status. So 75% of American doctors are now employees, and of new hires, 90% will choose to be an employee. Just so you know, imagine playing soccer on a field that's tilted at 30 degrees, and you're going to have to run uphill. That's what you're doing when you decide to become an employee. And we can talk about that more if you'd like.
Though on the flip side, when we're looking at owner-owned businesses, like we do a lot in the family medicine world, we're looking at overheads that are ours and ours alone to manage. So we've got two hats.
Well, it's interesting that you said overhead because that's the key, right? So the big themes, if we're going to talk primary care, is most of your audience primary care?
Not most of. There's a lot of primary care here, but we're across both continents. So
okay, great. So let me talk about primary care and concierge medicine. By the way, concierge medicine is a misnomer. Concierge medicine is direct pay primary care that happens to have a subscription payment basis.
Yeah.
And the reason why you can see 60% less patients, spend twice the time with them, and make the same amount of money is because as an employee, you're paying 70% overhead to the organization that hires you. And as a DPC owner, your overhead can be as low as 12%. And the
Mm.
finances look like magic, but they're actually real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Though I've also seen those solo practitioners really do a number on themselves because of their availability, and they're wearing both hats and they're not delegating some of those things that are happening within their day.
That's another misconception by people who this would be potentially if you decided to drop an insurance based or in Canada paid by the national health system based
Mhm.
practice and go into practice for yourself as a direct pay where your customer is the patient, you have the ability to draw any boundaries around that relationship that you wish. You do not have to be on call 24/7, 7 days a week. That is not true. What you're
Mhm.
doing is creating a package of services and availability for your patient that they feel is worth the amount that you're asking them to pay. And that's negotiable between you and your client every single time.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing back that choice to them. So I think sometimes they've decided to move out of one area of rules and being feeling trapped and move into a new set of rules and being trapped.
Well, in each case, though, they forgot boundaries are healthy.
Yes. Agree. So your work now in this space of burnout, is it burnout prevention or is it working with physicians who are identifying as burnt out? Both. Where do you find that you're focusing?
Well, it depends on what aspect of what I do we're talking about, but let's just talk about if you are struggling in your practice, you might bump into me because I'm still all over the internet. And then our our forward facing, public facing features are ones of burnout prevention and recovery from burnout. However, we use that term, not joy, because no doctors ever use the word joy to describe his practice. So I try and stay away from that. And I actually spoke to Christina Maslach herself, and she said she doesn't use the word because her study subjects don't use it.
Mm.
Although the AMA seems to like it for whatever reason, but the AMA is clueless to begin with. So what I do though, when I'm doing a discovery session with somebody is what we call the big 180. So most people, when you're under stress, will hunker down, go into survival mode, fight or flight or freeze or pray, and they'll be very focused on the things that they don't like and the things they want to avoid. And here's what I know, having worked with thousands of people who've gone from burned out to liking their practice again, and that is this. And I'm going to do, are we recording video too?
Mhm.
Watch my posture. You can avoid everything you don't want. If you're just listening, I'm pointing to the left. You can avoid everything you don't want, avoid it all, and you still won't get what you want because to get what you want, you'd have to, I'm pointing to the right now, figure out what that is and go get it. So what you don't want and what you want are tangentially related to each other, but avoiding what you don't want won't get you what you want. So what we do is very early on in the conversation, I say something like this. I really do want to hear everything that's going on because I know it's painful or you wouldn't be here.
Mhm.
However, what I'd like to hear first is what is your ideal practice description? What are the things that if they were present in your practice, you would run towards them? What do you really want? If you were the boss, how would you design this to be perfect for you?
Yeah.
And normally I get a big goldfish stare because nobody's ever asked them that.
Mm.
You know as well as I do, nobody ever asked you that in your residency training. Nobody's ever asked you that in your job if you're an employed physician because they have no vested interest and they just don't care. And by the way, how would they know what your ideal practice is? Only you can know that. And if you've never written it down, you're not even clear on what you want. So the first step is to create a target for yourself. Think of it as a bullseye target in an archery range, right? What's your ideal job description? Now, as you contemplate this, you may notice an initial lack of clarity. I want
Mm.
you to be super patient with yourself because it takes a couple of weeks for your ideal job description to come into your head. What would you run towards? A piece of it is something you had just as a general feeling when you chose to go to medical school. You had some sort of very vague vision of what it would look like in the future because you really didn't know what to expect or what it was going to take to get there. And it takes a while for your dreams and wishes to wake up. You might want to carry a little notepad with you just in case you get inspiration at a strange moment. Carry a pen and a notepad with you. Give yourself a couple of weeks to write down all the aspects. What kind of patients do you want to see? Doing what kind of things? For what kind of hours? And what kind of pay? On what kind of team and what kind of organization? Where in the world? Because the truth was, when you graduated from residency, you were completely free on all of these axes. You still can do anything you want anywhere in the world with this medical degree. The key is, what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that sometimes comes up when you're writing down your ideal job description is tears and shame and blame and all sorts of regret that it's taken this long for you to get clear on what you really want. Let that go. Thank God it's happening now, right? But thank God it's happening now. And then another double check for you is when you get what you think is your final ideal job description, by the way, write it down, put it on a dated piece of paper, put your name and a date, my ideal job description, and write it down. Hand it to somebody who knows you really well, your significant other or a friend, and have them read it and tell you if there's anything missing. Because you've been complaining to them for a while, so they know if it's complete or not.
Mm.
And then my question is, everything we've developed is super simple, right? So imagine a two-circle Venn diagram. This is a Venn of feelings. One circle represents how your current job feels. The other circle represents how it would feel if you were in your ideal job. Okay, so your current job, your ideal job, how much overlap does it feel like there is between those two right now? And typically, if I say 20, 40, 60, 80%, the person I'm talking to can immediately give me a number. Are you still practicing, Sarah?
Mm-hmm.
What's your overlap?
Ooh. So what is ideal and what do I want?
You know what your current practice feels like.
Yes.
And you can imagine what your ideal practice would feel like. How much overlap does it feel like there is between the two right now?
Okay. It's pretty good, but there's some pivoting still going on. So we're not quite there yet. We're still
Give it a
working out
number.
some things.
Give it a number.
Oh,
20, 40, 60, 80%.
I think it's 80% in the good.
Good. So the normal values, and I've asked thousands of doctors this question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Normal values, anything 70 and up is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an employee, you'll never get 100.
Mm-mm.
Even if you aren't an employee, you might never get 100. But the key is to get it as high as you can get it. People who are 40% or lower are usually in distress. 20% and less usually are really hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the interesting thing. Watch how this works. So you're 80% now, and you're working on a couple of things. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what you're working on. You might, if you're willing to share, go ahead and share us what you're working on in terms of
So the
tweaks.
things I think that right now are the pieces that we're working out is one, the call schedule, because we've had change in physician number.
Okay.
Right. So doing a merge obviously takes a lot of emergency department, takes a lot of your physical
Right.
health because you're on call and it's not like it was before. It's
Right.
busy. So
Right.
now a night shift, instead of like midnight, you can probably sleep. It's like, no, you're up all night. So you really have to think about the service to your patient load in clinic versus your recovery from the on-call at the emergency department
Right.
and number of days you'll be in clinic. So it's that little juggling piece. And then the piece of our staff that we've got on file. So right now the staff are also learning what is my role here with the changing number of doctors, with the patient expectations, and making sure we've got everybody on the right seat of the bus, that they're working to their highest level within the clinic to help support and look after the patients within our medical home. So it's that the dynamic of onboarding people, getting them to their highest scope, making sure there's things out of their backpack that don't need to be there so they've got the time to do the things that are of better value within our clinical situation. So they're kind of the two big ones. And
Okay,
then there's
so
always the additional like things coming in. Yeah.
right. So let's do the thought experiment. You're currently at
Mm.
80% overlap of the Venn diagram.
Mhm.
Imagine that imagine a point in the future when your schedule's figured out and all your people are tucked in the right places. What would the
Yeah.
number of overlap be at that point?
I think it would be more in that 90. I'm
Okay,
doing
cool.
what I love doing. I love people. I love the patients. I love the everything piece of the job. Yes.
So what that Venn diagram allows you to do is to estimate the actual increase in overlap if you were to successfully do something different in your practice. So sometimes when I've got somebody who's down 20, 30, 40, they may have 15 things on their list. And if they are choosing one, what I'll do is just put them through that thought experiment. You're 40 now. If we did this, where would you be? And they say, oh, 70. It's like, wow, that's a big one. Because normally it would be 5 or 10%, like you
Yeah.
just said, right? So it
Yeah.
gives you the ability to estimate the delta, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then last but not least, what you do is you take a piece of paper and put my master list, put your name and date it. And then this is the list you put down all the things you want to change. And everything would cause a movement from this practice towards your ideal practice if you incorporated it. So these two things, the scheduling and the tucking everybody on the team in, are on your master list right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is you can take this, which is an ideal job description, and I would encourage you to expand it into an ideal life description. Because back in the day, when you chose to go to medical school, a piece of you felt and knew that it was an extraordinary decision. And the reason is you were probably the only one in your high school class that did it. Okay. Everybody else peeled off and may have actually questioned your sanity, right? But you knew it was an extraordinary decision, and you may have had a fantasy, many people do, that it would lead to an extraordinary life, a life of service and purpose and meaning and making a difference. And now you may find yourself in a situation where your job has eaten your life. And
I
so,
think a lot of people are going to identify with that
right,
statement.
right. Well, that's because we teach residents how to abandon their life in pursuit of their education while they're in the belly of the passage through the bowels of the medical education system. So if you want to open this up into an ideal life description, what you'll find is that there is a portion of your life that's devoted to your career, to your calling, to your vocation, because not only do we want purpose out of our career as a doctor, we also want money, a certain adequate amount of money. And you can then have another discussion that this time brings in members of your family and all sorts of other folks about what role you want your career to play in your larger life. And so with those three things in hand, ideal job description, you know where you stand in the Venn of happiness, you've got your master plan of changes that you could make. The power of a list is, number one, to get it out of your head. So you've got these things out of your head. Your brain will now relax, knowing that it's on paper. By the way, pen on paper is much more powerful than any digital word processing document. We've got science to prove this. And then all you have to do is the second superpower of a list is it allows you to see everything before you, it's a P word, prioritize.
Yeah.
Before
Yeah.
you prioritize,
Yeah.
pick one.
Yeah.
Pick one, just one. Ideally, not the biggest thing on the list, because you're exercising your change muscles here for the first time in a long time. You're going to want to pick something simple and easy, low-hanging fruit, as they say. Make
Yeah.
a change. Step out of Einstein's insanity trap and take some responsibility to develop some agency and take authorship of your practice, your job, your career, your life going forward. And I split things into, I think this is a useful distinction: job, practice, career, life. Your job is what you do for your employer. Your practice is the magic you weave when the door is closed and it's just you and the patient and the family. When the doors are closed and the curtain is pulled, that's the magic. That's your practice. Most of us are working to find some wiggle room in our job to be able to practice in a way that keeps us satisfied and on point. Career, that's the arc of your jobs over the course of your life. And then your life is the bigger envelope that everything takes place in.
Yeah. With the 75% of US family doctors wanting to be employed, I see a lot of expectations put on them that they don't appear to, on first listenings, seem to have any thought that they have control about some of these
Right.
expectations.
Right.
And also, they've picked up the slack of the dismissal of MAs and the dismissal of staff, and they're at times cleaning rooms between patients
Right.
and trying to decide why they can't get it all done within a clinical day hours. And that heart-wrenching one more thing, it feels like it's the last straw.
Yeah, well, capitalistic businesses, for-profit businesses are extractive endeavors. If you decide to become an employee of a business, you become just another site from which they're extracting time, energy, and money. So a business is meant to maximize the return on investment to the shareholders and nothing else. And it will extract the most possible. It will suck the most possible out of everything that touches it, the payers, the patients, the workers. And so what's happening is everything you just described is an abusive business practice to pad the bottom line, the profit and loss statement of the organization by denying the physicians the resources that they need in order to do a good job. And what I found is the fundamental error, the fundamental blind spot of leadership that allows this kind of stuff to happen is that senior leaders never shadow their employee doctors. I've actually been in rooms where I had, because I do wellness leadership development, I've been in rooms where I had a whole room full of senior leaders. They were all had a C in front of their position.
Mm-hmm.
Couple of things. See, I like to ask questions right up front to an audience before I begin to present. And I said, raise your hand if you've ever actually shadowed a doctor as they were seeing patients in your organization. And only 2 or 3% of the hands will go up. So this is your CEO and your CMO. They're doctors. They think they don't have to shadow because they know what's going on. But even if they're a doctor, they're only one specialty of a doctor. So they don't know everything that's going on. And then CFOs. I actually sat in front of a room full of CFOs in Georgia one time, 20 CFOs. It was the CFO special interest group of the Georgia Hospital Association. And everybody in the room controlled a profit and loss statement that had multiple billions of dollars in it. And I said, 20 people in the Zoom frame, like Hollywood Squares, you know how it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Raise your hand if you've ever shadowed anybody in your system. 2 hands went up. And I said, raise your hand if you do it regularly. 1 hand stayed up, and the guy said, in a Georgia accent, they always talk like that. Well, when I first started, I was in manufacturing. He made me walk the assembly line every week. So that's the smartest boss I've ever heard. But here we have a person making financial decisions for a billion-dollar organization who's never once watched a single doctor see a patient in his organization. He has no idea how the sausage is made. And that's hypocrisy that knows no, you can't plumb the depth of that. There's no number of fathoms that can measure how deep that hypocrisy is. So not only are they extracting everything they can from you and removing any provisions, staffing, equipment, hours, scheduling, but they also know nothing about what you do. And clearly it doesn't make them uncomfortable enough to fix that vacuum in their knowledge base. They don't care. Now, that's not everybody. That's not everybody. But in American healthcare, the exception proves the rule. Because when you have a good team that cares and shadows and provisions you properly, that is a precious thing to hold on to with both hands.
Yeah. And you have physicians and clinicians and staff who value caring for patients, so they step up.
They step up, and what happens is you get abused. They'll de-staff you. So for instance, just a quick example, right? So let's say we have an 8-person family practice wing where everybody used to have their own RN at their side, triaging and rooming their patients, right? They got kicked out a long time ago, and now it's just MAs. And for the 8 doctors, the first thing that happens is they don't give them 8 MAs. First thing that happens is your three MAs down and you're rooming your own patients and doing vitals and stuff. And then two of the senior partners quit. And now you're seeing 8 doctors with the patients with 6 doctors and 3 MAs. And you know what? That's really, really difficult. But the CFO is really happy because you look really good on paper. You're seeing all those patients and generating all those RVUs with much less resources. And if you balk, if you as an individual say, I'm not going to do this anymore, they will question your work ethic. They'll stand right in your face and question your dedication to your patients. That is the face of evil with horns and a forked tail. That is the face of evil when it comes to being an administrator. Any administrator that doubts the resolve of a healthcare worker should be marched out of the building immediately. But it happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now what? With those physicians in those spaces, they can still ask these questions of what do I want? It
Absolutely.
feels
And
it feels hard. It feels really hard to
well,
even
and
imagine beyond what you have.
right. It's like the child in Oliver Twist who wants a little more gruel, right? So what I'll tell you is that your residency education taught you how to be a good resident. Color inside the lines, do what you told, overperform. It didn't teach you how to build a healthy practice, especially in the long term. We've developed 7 different skill sets that are necessary for a practicing doctor, not a resident, a practicing doctor, to build a healthy practice with an overlap with their ideal that makes them happy, with some life balance, right? And the missing skill sets are these. I've just taught you the ideal practice generator model. So that 4-part model is clear to me. Every doctor would benefit from having an ideal job description and reviewing it every quarter for the rest of your career, because the healthcare system is going to collapse in the next several years, and you want to be on the front end of that wave and surf it, hopefully. Then there's tools to get home sooner, practice efficiency tools. The place to watch right now is note writing AI digital scribe software. That is going to cut your workload in half when it comes to documentation. I got news for you though. When the AI software takes away 50 to 75% of your time in documentation, they're going to make you see more patients, just so you know. It's coming down the pike, okay? And we'll reach a different burnout threshold. There's balance and boundaries tools. Nobody's taught you the off switch. Nobody's taught you how to build life balance into every week. Nobody's taught you how to take a 2-week vacation, although Canadians naturally and automatically do a much better job than American doctors. There's all sorts of things we can do to get life balance back. There's eye of the storm lessons, simple techniques to be cool, calm, collected, and centered, no matter what's going on around you in your office day. There's leadership tools. Doctors learn one leadership skill set, which is not a good one. That's diagnose, give orders, and expect people to obey and comply. Until you learn how to be a servant leader who leads by asking questions, you're working way too hard. Then there's manage your boss training. There is a way to manage your boss in a bureaucracy to get more of what you want for your ideal practice, but it's not pounding the table and accusing your boss of having shit for brains, which is the way doctors usually interact with their boss. That's 5. And then the last one.
How they'd like to.
Right. The last one is we have a very specific job search formula that so far has never failed to get a job offer from everybody who's ever done it. But the job search formula is triggered it's specifically built to avoid doctors' number one job search mistake. Here's the doctor's number one job search mistake. Remember, your fundamental and formative experiences of getting a position were when you got into medical school and when you got into your residency program. And there was only one focus of those 2 processes, and that was to get them to pick you. Pick me, pick me, pick me. When you're graduated and you're board certified and you're out in your job search, it doesn't matter whether they pick you. That's completely irrelevant. What's important is, watch this little sleight of hand here. What's important is, does the job you're interviewing for, and you're going to interview way more thoroughly than anybody they've ever seen, you're going to have a checklist of at least 80 questions in your hand when you show up for your 3rd interview to make sure that this job, as best you can tell, is at least a 70% overlap with your what? Ideal job description, or you wouldn't take it. It's about whether you would pick this job because it matches your ideal, not whether they want you. Because that's the mistake people make. They're acting like a resident. Oh, you want me? Okay, what do you want me to do? Right? You got to stop acting like a resident if you're going to get some fulfillment in your career.
Yeah. So improved negotiation based on your priorities, your choice, who you want to be, the redesign of you and your career and your wishes in your life. Love this.
And realize that all this does is take the tilted field from a 30-degree tilt. It's still going to have a 5-degree tilt. You're still going to be running uphill, but the effort will be less when you're getting more of what you want, so that you'll feel like it's still an equitable exchange of value. And the question is, if you're really getting trashed by your leadership and they're completely disrespecting you, not giving you the staff and the support that you need, the question is always, can you turn that around here? Or is the better move to actually trigger a job search right now? Because everywhere is a great job market for doctors these days, and it's only going to get better as the years go by. Like criminally better.
Oh, this is good. I'm pleased because the overall, I think our physicians are experiencing burnout, and I don't know that we were taught a lot of the skills that we needed to even know that we had a choice. I know even within my own career, I've had those moments where I've said, don't ask me to do anything else. You don't understand how busy I am. And it feels like this is the last straw. I couldn't, this was the kind of my origin story was at that point of I can't. But when we start to understand there are different ways of doing this, that there are opportunities, a skill set, you called it, that we can learn skills.
Well, what you learned to do as a resident was deny your feelings, deny your energy levels in a single-minded pursuit of the finish line. And residency is a time-constrained piece of your career. It has a beginning and it has an end. And the resident's main job is survival to cross the finish line. It doesn't matter whether you're in one piece when you get there. You can be missing one eye and 3 fingers off your left hand, but if you manage to drag your body across the finish line, you're free. And the challenge is you have not been free for 7 years minimum. So you forget that you're free.
Yeah.
And so when I'm teaching residents, I tell them, get yourself a journal. After every rotation, write down what you enjoyed and what you didn't about that journal, because what you're planning for is what you'll build after you're past the finish line. And in the meantime, don't let this survival contest eat your life. So keep a friendship or two, keep a hobby or two alive along the way, because what we're building for is what happens after you graduate. For me, the thing that kept me sane was that I grew up in England as a schoolboy and learned how to play rugby. So when I came back here, I already had 3.5 years of rugby experience. So I captained my college team, I captained a team in my residency. So I was always playing on the local rugby team, which got me, let's see, 2 workouts a game and a drunken Saturday night every week, right? At least when we were in season. That kept me sane. A whole bunch of friends too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So keep a hobby up.
Yeah. Yeah. And doesn't have to be done perfectly. It just needs something other than every day.
Yeah, don't let your life collapse into the singularity of your education process, because then you have to actually start from scratch and grow a life when you get out.
Yeah. Yeah. It becomes harder and harder to see that there's anything else other than what we're having in our day to day.
Well, and you know how it is. I'm 66. And as you become an adult, as you get out of your 20s, it becomes harder and harder to make friends. As a matter of fact, it's almost like a lost art. You know, how did we do that besides drinking? And so preserve some friendships, some people that you love, right?
Yeah. Good advice. Where can people find you if they're interested to learn more?
Well, there's a whole cornucopia at my website. It's called you have to put THE on the front, The Happy MD. By the way, I'm not The Happy MD. This is a place where you can go to get the tools you need so you can be a happy MD. I encourage you to cruise around in the blog posts and look at the resources. We got a free 5 CME credit life balance course. It's our top 3 or 4 different life balance tools right on the front page there that you can sign up for. And then if you need some support, you can see all 6 of our coaches. You can schedule a discovery session, and in the contact page will let you ask me any question you want. It comes to me, I'll answer it for you personally.
Nice. Is there anything we didn't talk about today that you would, or parting gifts, parting lessons to our listeners?
Loads and loads and loads of things we didn't talk about.
Of course. I think we briefly touched on this topic, well, the topics.
Yeah. If you're an employee, well, actually, let's go. Burnout's not a problem. So let me just give you burnout's true identity, and then we'll let you go. Burnout's not a problem. It's not that it's not an issue you should concern yourself with, but it doesn't meet the definition criteria for the word problem. Because the word problem comes from mathematics, and it's actually quite specific. By definition, a problem has a solution. And Sarah, if I apply a solution to a problem, what should happen to the problem?
Yeah, you don't have a problem anymore if you've got a solution.
Right?
That's right. No problem.
So a problem is solved by a one-shot solution. Snap your fingers and it's gone. Apply the solution, it's taken care of. And problems are exceedingly rare in medicine, exceedingly rare in clinical medicine, non-existent in leadership. So let me just state a clinical problem, a pointing abscess. So imagine, if you will, a boil the size of half a golf ball on the butt cheek of one of your patients, and it's got a white head on it the size of your pinky fingernail. It's so ripe, when you walk in the room, you can hear it. What's the solution?
You let out the muck.
Let out the muck. How quaintly stated. Yes. If I was ever going to see patients for money again, I would be a boil doctor. And people would come into my boil clinic, and the nurse would say, "Show me your boil." And if it wasn't right, she'd send them home. But if it was right, she'd send them to me. And I'd just sit in the back with gloves and blades and say, "Next, next, next." And I'd sleep like a baby. Like a baby, I tell you. Because why?
Because you solved the problem.
I cured every patient that day. Hardly had to write a note, right? Yeah. I maintain that if you're a primary care doctor, you would pay me money, and we can negotiate a fee, but you would pay me money to put 3 boils a day on your schedule, just so you could have the pleasure of treating a problem. But most patients don't have problems like that, do they?
No.
They have a whole list.
Yes.
A whole list of things that you can't solve. As a matter of fact, there's actually a sheet in everybody's chart. The top sheet of an old paper chart was a list. Every patient had this list just inside the cover. What's the name of the list?
Problem list.
Problem list. Now, real quick, I just showed you that a boil is a problem. Would you put the boil on the problem list?
No.
No. What goes on the problem list?
Things that are unsolvable.
The things that you can't solve. This is how bizarre the word problem is used in medicine and everywhere else, by the way. But let me just ask you this. Do you think there's one thing you can do one time and you never have to worry about burnout again?
Nope.
No. So it's clearly not a problem, which means it has no solution. You can't solve it. Just because it's not a problem, you can't solve it, right? How do you address something like that? Because burnout is actually a dilemma.
Yes.
Actually a never-ending balancing act between the energy that you burn and the energy that you recharge yourself with. And you can create a balance that works for you, but it's not a solution. It's not one thing you do once. It's a different S word.
Yeah.
ST.
Well, it's a
R.
It's not steps, but strategies then.
Strategy.
If it's got R in it.
Strategy. Now, the difference between a solution and a strategy is very simple. It's just the number of steps.
Yeah.
So what I see is a lot of magical thinking about medical leaders who want you to give them a solution to burnout, or you may be looking for what you think is the solution to burnout. Stop it. Burnout's not a problem. It doesn't have a solution. It's a dilemma. You're looking for a strategy. And when I'm working with coaching clients, even though it's more than one step, I want to keep it simple as possible, because I don't want the strategy to be the last straw that tips them over the edge and into burnout. So when I think about a coach helping a client develop a burnout prevention strategy, it's 3 to 5 tools. They'll test them one at a time to see what works. 3 to 5 tools that they're going to turn into habits because the balancing act never ends. So when you think about burnout, think about strategy. What are 2 or 3 different things that can make a difference in your energy levels and can give you the overlap with your ideal job description that you're finding? Because when people graduate from our coaching, they're always amazed at how few things are different, but what a huge difference it's made. And usually there's one life balance tool, there's one practice efficiency tool that has to do with a different way that they chart, and they've learned how to, our eye of the storm technique, to be cool and calm and focused and maybe even happy during the course of even the most complicated day. It doesn't take much to turn burnout back and make it tolerable, but you can't look for a solution. You got to build your strategy. That's what I'd leave you with.
Love it. Well, thank you.
BeHappyMD.com.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time, and I think our listeners are going to enjoy this as well. Okay. Bye, guys. Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.